Well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in to the Urban Network podcast. I'm your host, Hewitt Pagenstecher, and today we are joined by Susan Bladholm, who's the founder and president of Friends of Frog Ferry, which is a local grassroots nonprofit and initiative to bring a pedestrian ferry to the Portland metro region. Susan, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm curious, just getting straight to it, why is there a need for a pedestrian or passenger ferry in the Portland metro region?
Well, you just think about livability for a community, right? And being able to get to and from places is really, really important for a healthy community and a healthy economy. And the cost of congestion here in the Portland metro area is about $1.2 million a day, let alone the enormous influx of greenhouse gas emissions that we are creating. And we've always had pretty good air quality here in the Portland metropolitan region. Actually, that's deteriorating. And so you just look at best practices for healthy communities, passenger ferries are really kind of where it's at for river cities.
Nice. So that would reduce traffic as well, having like less cars on the freeways and highways.
Absolutely. So when you think about people that absolutely can't take a ferry or commute other ways, and I remember like as a single mom, I needed to drop kids off at schools. We weren't on a bus route. So it's not going to work for everyone, but you also think of the cost of congestion in terms of getting cargo, being able to move. And so when you see the really big semi trucks, moving the containers of goods, it's really important that we're freeing up our roadways for people that actually need to use them, and that commuters that can take other modes of transit to and from their jobs can use those.
Yes, I think we would all agree that we'd like to see kind of less like less cars on the road and like less just like larger like trucks and semi trucks and whatnot. I'm curious, how did you get into transportation and sustainability? Like, tell me a little bit about your history in those industries.
It was really by sheer luck. So, right when I graduated from college, I was hired by the state of Oregon. It's now called Business Oregon, but it was the state economic development department. And I had just come back from graduation and I played tennis in nationals. And the state tourism director said, "We want you to look into staging a statewide bike ride." And Cycle Oregon was born. So just in terms of transportation and logistics and looking at alternate modes of transit, it became a passion of mine. I went on to work for the Port of Portland. I was the director of marketing there. And so that is really the big regional transportation infrastructure leader here in the region. And I just learned so much about how we move people and products around the world. And then I was just across the street here working for Ericsson International, which is a global helicopter company specializing in really large catastrophic wildfires and emergency response, restringing power lines that have come down, for instance, or building dams or bridges. And then I've been a student pilot. And so flying here in the region for about the past 15 years or so, flying out of Aurora Airport up and over the Columbia and Willamette rivers to other locations like the Bay Area or Vancouver, BC or Seattle, and just seeing how the river systems were being used in the waterways for transit. And so one day I just landed and said, I don't understand it. I think I'm tallying about $12 billion a year in transportation costs, and nothing is making a dent in congestion or in decreasing greenhouse gas emissions. We got to do something. And started doing research about a passenger ferry service. And it's just absolutely a best practice for river cities in the US as well as internationally.
Wow. And so you had this idea and it made a lot of sense just financially and logistically. How are you able to go about like rallying volunteers and a team of leaders to start the Friends of Frog Ferry initiative?
Well, it's taken a lot of time, but honestly, Hewitt, it hasn't been that difficult. It's just talking with people and saying, hey, here's a concept. And I want to be really clear. People often give me credit for it being this novel idea. It's not novel. I mean, river cities around the world have this. And when you think of the founding here of our community 30,000 years ago to 300 years ago with the indigenous peoples here, this area was founded based on being placed at the confluence of two rivers here, and they were traversing our riverways, both on the Columbia and the Willamette River. So it was just with every person I talked with, oftentimes just being curious and saying, hey, we have this concept and we want to learn a little bit more. And so it was outreach to Seattle and San Francisco, and the ferry experts there said, we love this idea. We love Portland. We want to help you. And then here locally, it's been both the outreach that we've done, but it's also people moving here from the Bay Area or Seattle and saying, hey, I want to take the ferry here. I did a Google search for Portland Ferry and I found you. And then I realized, oh no, there isn't a ferry service yet, but it's coming. How can I help you?
So I remember when I was telling people about this podcast coming up, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm interviewing this leader of this great organization called Frog Ferry, or Friends of Frog Ferry. And people were just so interested and intrigued by the name. What can you tell me about why it's called Friends of Frog Ferry?
Well, it's a good question. And going back, this is just about 5 years old, this initiative. It started in May of 2017. And so I never intended to start this. It was just a concept, and I put together like a 10-page plan and I handed it off to the transit leaders. But as it was building up momentum, we needed to call it something. And originally I wanted to call it Axe, because I thought we're a timber town here and it will be the Armada Express. And my brother said, no, that sounds like axe murder. That's just bad karma. Don't call it axe. And I have a lithograph of Frog that it's the chair of the Chinook tribe, the Chinook tribal nation, Tony Johnson, and then their resident artist, Adam McIsaac, had created for me as a gift when I worked for the Port of Portland. We worked on a major installation at the Port of Portland headquarters. And so I looked up on my wall at this lithograph I love so much, and I called Adam, and I remember it was like 10 o'clock at night. And I was like, Adam, I know this is crazy. I don't know if this initiative is going to go anywhere, but I have to put a name to it. And I love Frog. And frogs are considered good luck really across all cultures. Mm-hmm. But in Chinookan mythology, Frog is credited working with Raven and Coyote with having taken the local people down to the riverbanks and collecting the nettles to stitch together to create nets. And so frogs are considered very good fortune, and you're always supposed to walk around a frog and not over it, and certainly not to step on a frog. So that's where Frog Ferry came from.
I love how you're like bringing to light some of the history like from this region and like creating this initiative. Does the Frog Ferry, will it serve to like kind of educate people more about like this history?
Absolutely. And so we've been talking with David Harrelson and Greg Archuleta with the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. And Greg is a tribal leader there, and the two of them lead cultural outreach. And so Greg has offered to put together a narration for us on tours. So we can imagine, particularly like on Saturdays with family members going out, and imagine if you're picking up the ferry at Salmon Street Fountain, and then you're taking it over to Omsey for a day with a family. You can be learning about the river ecosystem here. And Allison Tivnon is a board member, and she calls them tadpole tours for kids. We also have a leader, Audubon, who's offered to put together a narrated tour as well. The fact of the matter is, just from Cathedral Park to River Place, there are 7 peregrine falcon nests along that route, and particularly like under the eaves of bridges. So I think we've got a great opportunity for educational programs that we can change, over time and with the seasons.
Yeah, and I can imagine families taking that to OMSI. It'd be like stopping by a floating exhibit on your way to more exhibits.
Absolutely, that's right. And as you're looking out and you can see the salmon jumping and you can see the birds overhead. And it's just, you get a sense for the ecology and this natural ecosystem for our region that people just don't typically get to appreciate their hometown from the river view.
Yeah, I've had like a unique kind of experience of enjoying some of the river because I used to do crew in high school
oh my gosh,
for Rose City Rowing Club.
Yeah.
And I really hope more people have the opportunity to enjoy like being out on the water and going underneath all the Portland bridges.
Yeah, we would really love to do some partnerships with some of the different crew teams. And I think Nick's still over with Rose City
Yeah.
crewing. And so that's something that even for our facilities, if we can work together on it, for the Dragon Boat, um, teams as well. And we've got a couple really avid paddle boarders on our board. I'm a kayaker. So I think that there is work that we can do for this entire river ecosystem and all coexisting. I'm actually a trustee on the Human Access Project board. So they really started with a focus on access for swimmers. And Willie Levinson there's just done a tremendous job of really trying to activate our riverfront and getting more and better opportunities for swimmers, but for all users of the river to get down to the river's edge. So we're all working together on that. And so, you know, you've got an appreciation of having been out rowing, but a lot of Portlanders have never been on the river.
Yeah, they just enjoy it from the bridge view.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So logistically, like how would this look in terms of like how far north or like south would these stops go? Like what would be some of the primary stops that you kind of foresee like the ferry having?
Yeah. So we have 10 proposed stops, and I have people every week say, oh, you need to put a stop here because this is where my sister lives or what have you. But we really try not to get too precious about how we come up with the stops. We've actually done that work working with the public transit agencies. So PBOT, ODOT, Metro, and TriMet, for them to say, here's where we've got the greatest need. And then what's really, really important is how do people get to and from the ferry dock locations, okay? We don't want people driving their cars down to the ferry dock. So it's called the first and final mile is super, super important. So we've mapped out our route, and you kind of have to plant a flag and start somewhere, but from Vancouver, Washington, all the way down to Oregon City. That's not to say we're going to start the ferry with all 10 locations. Our plan is to start a ferry pilot project in 2023 that would run from the Cathedral Park dock, an existing dock, to River Place in the middle of downtown Portland. One boat, 70 passengers, to show everyone this can be done. And then there's quite a bit of federal money out there with the Federal Transportation Administration. And so typically a ferry operator goes back year after year and asks for a little bit more money to pay for another dock location and another boat.
Nice. So, all right. So there's some work that needs to be done. I'm curious a little bit about how far you've come along in this initiative and, you know, what more needs to happen to bring Frog Ferry into fruition.
Yeah, you know, after 5 years, we've taken this almost as far as we can on our own as a nonprofit 501c3. Those transit agencies, PBOT, ODOT, TriMet, and Metro, all told us about 4 years ago, you've got to go raise the funds for, and you have to conduct these 4 different studies. So there's a demand modeling study, and there's a finance plan in there, and a big operational feasibility study, and the pro formas around what this thing would cost, and how does that pencil out in relation to other modes of transit. And those have been delivered and very clearly indicate that this is cost effective, it's sustainable, it is the most preferred mode for people to transit, particularly in the Bay Area. They'd rather do that than drive their own cars. So we know that it's sort of what I want to say, like a first line of defense for people getting out of their single occupancy vehicles. They're willing to take a ferry where they may not be willing to get on a bus. And so we really want to make sure that we're tapping into that demand. So all of those different studies are there. We've presented them to City Council. We've presented it to the Oregon Department of Transportation Commission, and that's there. The next big step is we need to have a public agency partner with us, because our vision has always been for this to be a public ferry service that's affordable to everyone. To privatize it, ticket prices would be $11 on up. I mean, it's crazy. And it's not the ethos behind who we are. We always knew this wasn't going to be a moneymaker because it's public transit, and public transit really by definition is subsidized. Our cost per seat on this, the subsidy is about $2.50 in comparison to all transit for TriMet. And again, my numbers are pre-COVID, but we're about $17.50 a seat. So whereas we really need TriMet and their services are really important, just for a comparison, we know ferries are very low cost, both in terms of the infrastructure, because essentially you're taking a bus and you're putting together a service using existing bus stops that you kind of build out a little bit, but you don't have to build out roads or rail for the river. So it's not even pennies on the dollar when it comes to cost from an infrastructure perspective. And then again, it's about a seventh the cost of traditional transit from an operational perspective. So for who's going to be our partner, we're going to Portland City Council on March 30th. And knock on wood here, they're going to get behind us as a meaningful partner. Why do we have to have a public agency partner on this? Because we as a nonprofit cannot apply for public grants, really both state or federal. We have to have, they're called a designated recipient. So the city of Portland is our best bet on that. So we're really hopeful they come together.
So I'm curious, how can people listening to this podcast kind of help this come to fruition and maybe help you collaborate with that as like a partner to make this happen?
Thank you for asking the question. This is such a grassroots effort. And I think sometimes people read about us in the media and they think, oh, they must have big money behind them or whatever. We just don't. It's just a group of people like you and me saying, we believe in a better Portland and a better future for Portland. We're super bullish on it. So it's everything from writing us a letter of support. And we post those on our website. We love those because our elected leaders really like to hear from constituents. And you can literally just send your letters to Susan at frogferry.com and we will post them. We're also looking for people to provide testimony. Today we're moving into an office. We have volunteers that are coming to help us move.
Yeah,
I mean, thank you. So it's really, there's so many different things. Some people are like, can I help with filing? Can I come and help volunteer at one of your events? So what we try to do is get a sense from volunteers. What do they like to do? What are they passionate about? What are their skills? And then we match them with what our needs are. But the letters of support, really, that's huge, especially to elected officials. And we're going to be sending out an email here probably by the end of this week with the names of our 5 Portland City Council members in anticipation of testifying on March 30th to say, please be a meaningful partner for us, because there are all these funds out there from the feds, specifically for passenger ferries. So if we, Portland, don't get that money coming here, that passenger ferry funding is going to go to another river city.
Well, one thing that got me pretty excited about Friends of Frog Ferry was looking at like the ferry design on your website, or like what it might look like. That was like really cool to see, and I would love to see that on the water. It looks so fun, and I could imagine getting on there with friends and like kind of traveling around town a little bit while enjoying the view from the Willamette, which would be amazing. How else can people, or how could people learn more about Frog Ferry or get in touch with you?
Well, we're just at frogferry.com, so you can check out our website, and my email address is Susan, S-U-S-A-N, at frogferry.com. I'm on LinkedIn as well, and we respond to every email that comes in. We're also on social media as well, so you can check us out.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you responding to my email and coming on this podcast and learning more about Friends of Frog Ferry, Susan.
Thank you for the opportunity, Hewitt. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And everybody, thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Urban Network Podcast. For more information on local professional networking events, go to urbannetwork.biz.